I almost did go on this trip. That is the part that stays with me the most now. I almost just stayed home. It was a Thursday night. I was on my couch eating leftover pasta, scrolling through photos of a trail I'd been putting off for almost 2 years. Cascade Ridge, a 3-day solo loop in the Pacific Northwest. Moderate difficulty, good reviews, plenty of foot traffic on weekends. I had done solo trips before, 4 of them. I was not careless about it. 4 of them. I told my sister the exact trailhead location. I left my full itinerary in a notes app she had access to. I packed a personal locator beacon. I checked the weather 3 separate times. I knew what I was doing. I was careful. I hit the trailhead the following Friday morning just after 6. The air had that sharp, wet pine smell I genuinely love. The kind that hits the back of your throat and makes you feel like you have stepped into a different world entirely. My pack was sitting right at 31 pounds. My boots were fully broken in. My poles clicked against the gravel in that familiar rhythm that always makes my shoulders drop on the first mile out. Everything felt exactly right. The first day was perfect. I pushed about 9 miles, found a flat clearing just off the trail near a small creek, and had my tent staked before the light went soft. I cooked a dehydrated chicken and rice meal. I drank my tea. I wrote 2 pages in my journal. I was asleep by 9:30. I did not see a single other hiker the whole day. That was something I actually liked about this trail. Saturday was when things started to feel slightly off. Nothing I could put a name to, just a feeling that sat low in my chest and did not go away. I packed up early and was moving by 7. The trail curved west and climbed steadily through dense Douglas fir. I passed a trail junction around mile 11 and noticed a small orange ribbon tied to a branch. The kind hikers sometimes leave as a marker. I did not think much of it at the time. I kept walking. Around noon, I stopped at a rocky overlook to eat a bar and check my map. I had my phone in airplane mode to save battery. I pulled it out, looked at my position, and looked around. That was the first moment I noticed something, a sound, or more accurately, the complete absence of one. The birds had stopped. I sat still for a moment. I looked around in every direction. Nothing was visible. Nothing was moving. The birds started back up within about a minute. I told myself it was probably a hawk passing through the area. I kept going. I made camp for night 2 near a small alpine lake. I had picked this specific spot months before based on photos I had saved. The lake reflected the tree line in the evening light, and it was one of the most genuinely beautiful places I had ever set up a tent. I was in good spirits. I made dinner, filtered water from the lake, hung my fruit bag in a tree, and watched the light slowly die on the water. I fell asleep around 10. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because my watch was sitting right next to my head, and the display lit up clearly when I moved. I did not know what had woken me. There was no obvious sound. I just opened my eyes. I lay there in the dark and listened. The tent fabric was barely moving. No wind, no rain, just the quiet sound of the creek about 40 feet away doing what it always did. Then I heard it. A single slow footstep on it scrabbled. Close, maybe 20 feet from my tent, slightly to the right side. I stopped breathing. I told myself it was a deer. This part of the trail had deer. I had seen fresh scat earlier in the day. I told myself, deer, maybe elk, possibly a raccoon. Do not be dramatic about this. I went through the list twice in my head. The footstep did not come again. I waited for almost 15 minutes without moving before my heartbeat started to slow back down. I eventually fell back asleep, though I am still not entirely sure how I managed that. I woke up to pale gray light coming through the tent walls just after 6. I unzipped the tent, stepped out onto the ground, and immediately saw it. Boot prints, not deer tracks, not elk, not any animal at all. Boot prints, a clear, deep, ridged boot print in the soft mud about 12 feet from the opening of my tent. Then another one. Then another. Then another. They moved in a slow arc around the left side of my tent, curved toward the right side, and stopped just outside my door. I stood there in my socks, staring at them. My brain was doing that thing where it keeps building reasonable explanations even when there genuinely are none. I looked at the tree line, dense, completely still. The light was flat and gray, and everything looked the same in every direction. I got my boots on and packed that tent in under 7 minutes. I was moving before I made breakfast, before I filtered water. I just walked. Fast. About 3 miles into the morning, on a narrow section of trail cut into a hillside, I glanced back. Just a quick look, the way you do automatically. And I saw a figure about a quarter mile behind me on the trail. Dark jacket. Moving at a steady pace. Not rushing. Just walking. Consistent. I turned forward and pushed harder. I looked back again 20 minutes later at a bend where I had a longer sight line back down the trail. The figure was still there, same distance behind me. Not closing the gap. Not falling back, like they were not trying to catch up. Like they were just keeping pace with wherever I went. I pulled out my locator beacon and held it in my hand for the rest of that hike. 4 miles. I ran most of the last 2. When I finally hit the trailhead parking lot, a couple was loading coolers into their truck. I walked directly over to them and asked if I could stand near them until my car was ready to go. They looked a little confused, but they said yes. I did not explain everything. I just told them someone on the trail had made me uncomfortable. The woman nodded and said, "That happens." I drove for 40 minutes before I pulled off the road and just sat there. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I never saw the figure at the trailhead. I never saw another car pull out after mine. I do not know who was behind me that morning. I do not know whose prints were circling outside my tent while I slept. But I know those prints curved all the way around my tent. Slowly. Carefully. Like whoever made them was trying very hard not to wake me up. I have not gone back to that trail. I am not sure I ever will. This was supposed to be a nothing trip. 4 guys, 3 days, 1 campsite. That was the whole plan. Me, my buddy Derek, his cousin Kyle, and our friend Trent drove out to a national forest campground in northern Georgia on a Friday afternoon in early June. We had done the same trip before. Same general area, same campground, same basic idea. Just a loose, low-key weekend to decompress and not think about anything for a few days. Derek and I had both been working brutal hours that spring. We needed it. We got there around 4 in the afternoon. Tents were up by 5. We had cracked the first round before the sun even touched the ridgeline. It was one of those early summer evenings where the air is warm but not thick yet. That good window before the real heat and humidity rolls in. Fireflies were just starting up at the tree line. Someone had a speaker going at low volume. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed. Nothing more complicated than that. The campground had 2 other groups that night, a family with young kids about 2 sites down, and a pair of older guys who had the look of serious fishermen. Nobody bothered anybody. Everyone stayed in their own lane, completely normal. We ate late, turned the speaker off around midnight, and let the fire die down to coals. Kyle and Trent went to bed first, maybe around 1 in the morning. Derek and I sat up for another half hour or so, just talking quietly. Then we turned in. I had been asleep for what felt like maybe 2 hours when I heard footsteps on the gravel path between the sites. I am not a paranoid person by nature. Footsteps in a campground at 2 in the morning are not unusual. People get up to use the bathroom. People check on their coolers. It happens. I did not move. I just lay there half awake, listening to the sound. The footsteps slowed. Then they stopped, right at the edge of our campsite. I waited. About 30 seconds. Maybe 40. Nothing happened. Then a voice came, low and a little rough, like someone who had been outside in the cold for a while. "Hey, is anybody awake over there?" I sat up inside my tent. Derek's tent was right next to mine and I heard him shift around. The voice came again. "My car broke down on the access road. I need to borrow a phone." I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent partway. I pointed the beam toward the path and there was a man standing just at the edge of our site. White male, maybe mid-40s. Dark canvas jacket, jeans, boots, a backpack on one shoulder. He put his hand up to block the light from his eyes. "Sorry to wake you," he said. "Car just died up the road. I have no service out here." This is the part I go back to the most, because nothing I did next was unreasonable. Most people in that exact situation would do the same thing. I got up, I put on my shoes, I grabbed my phone and asked him for the number. He gave it to me. I dialed. It rang 6 times and went to a voicemail. A generic automated message. No name, nothing personal. I told him that. He scratched the back of his neck and looked back over his shoulder in the direction of the access road. "Can I try one more?" he asked. I handed him my phone. He dialed slowly, like he was reading a number out of his memory, squinting a little as he went through the digits. It rang. He waited, no answer. He handed the phone back and said, "Nobody is picking up. Would you mind walking up there with me? Just to the road. I want to see if maybe I can push it down to the campground." Something in me went cold right then. I cannot fully explain it. It was not one specific thing. It was the timing of the pause before he said it. It was the way he had positioned himself so that he was slightly between me and Derek's tent, without me really noticing when it happened. It was the fact that the access road into this campground was 1.5 miles away, uphill, in complete darkness, and he had walked that entire distance in the dark with a pack to knock on a stranger's campsite instead of going to the camp host station. That station was right at the entrance of the campground with a 24-hour light burning above the door. I said, "I am not going to do that, but I will sit with you until morning if you need somewhere to wait." He looked at me. He just looked at me, long enough that it stopped being normal, long enough that the space between us started to feel wrong. Then he said, "You know what? I think I will figure it out." He turned and walked back toward the path without another word. I did not go back to sleep. I sat in my camp chair with my flashlight across my knees and my pocket knife in my lap, until there was enough gray light in the sky that I could see clearly in all directions. At 6:30, I walked up to the camp host and described the man in full. The host frowned and said nobody had reported a broken down vehicle. He drove the entire access road while I watched from the entrance. No car, no vehicle of any kind sitting on the side of the road. Nothing. We packed up our gear and left a full day early. I've gone over that night many times since then. I keep landing on the same moment. That single question about walking up the road with him. Just us two. In the dark. In the middle of a forest. At 2 a.m. Away from my friends. Away from the other campers. Away from the light. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had said yes. I still do not have an answer. I'm comfortable sitting with. I've been backpacking solo for 3 years before this happened. I want to say that up front. I am not someone who panics easily. I do not want this to sound like I overreacted, because I genuinely do not think I did. This was a 4-day solo trip through a wilderness preserve in central Colorado, not a national park, a state-managed wilderness area with a smaller operation and much less foot traffic, the kind of place where you can go a full day without seeing another person on the trail. I liked that about it. I had done the first 2 days without any issues. I had logged about 18 miles and was feeling strong and steady. Day 3 started normally. I was up at 5:30. I had instant oatmeal and black coffee before the light fully came up. I broke down camp and was on the trail by 7. The section I was hiking wound through a high meadow before dropping down into a canyon system. About 12 miles of varied terrain for the day. The meadow was beautiful in the early morning. September light at altitude in Colorado has this particular pale gold quality. Everything looks slightly unreal in it, but in a way that makes you want to stop and look around every few minutes. I was about 4 miles into the day when I heard someone coming up the trail behind me. I stepped to the side to let them pass. That is just standard trail manners. A man came around the bend, tall, heavy-set, wearing a tan shirt and khaki pants. Wide-brimmed hat. He had what looked like a badge on the front of his shirt. He nodded at me and said, "Morning, how are you doing out here?" I told him I was doing great. He stopped walking. He asked how long I had been out, which trailhead I had come in from, and where I was planning to exit. Those are all fairly normal questions for a ranger to ask. I answered everything. I told him my planned exit point and my timeline for getting there. He nodded along as I talked. Then he said he was heading roughly in the same direction and offered to walk with me for a stretch. Something about checking on a water source a few miles ahead that had been flagged for contamination testing. I said sure. We walked together for about 20 minutes. He was polite. He made small talk. He asked where I was from, whether I had been to this preserve before. The conversation felt fine on the surface, easy and light. But I was paying attention the whole time. The way you do when you are a woman alone on a trail with a man you just met. Not obvious attention. Just that quiet, steady undercurrent of awareness that never fully turns off, and a few things were adding up in a way I did not like. His boots were wrong. I know that sounds like a small detail, but I noticed that they were clean, not just lightly used, clean in a way that told me he had not been on trail for more than maybe an hour at most. No dust on the laces, no dried mud on the soles, no dried mud on the soles. We'd both just walked through a wet section of trail. My boots were dark with moisture up to the ankle. His looked like he had just taken them out of the box that morning. He did not have a radio. Every ranger I'd ever come across in the backcountry had a radio clipped to their shoulder or to their vest. It is a basic requirement for safety and communication out in remote areas. There was no radio on him, no earpiece, no communication device of any kind that I could see. And the badge itself, when he was looking away for a moment, I glanced at it directly. It did not match any agency badge I had ever seen. It was the right general shape, but the printing looked off. The text was unclear. There was no visible seal on it. I did not say any of this out loud. I kept the conversation going. I kept my pace steady and even, and I quietly reached into my hip belt pocket and switched my personal locator beacon to live GPS tracking mode, not the emergency signal, just active tracking, so my position was being logged. We reached a fork in the trail, and I told him my route was taking me left, down toward the canyon. He said, "Actually, the water source I need to check is down that way too. I will keep going with you." My stomach dropped. I stopped walking. I turned and faced him directly. I said, "I am going to take a break here and eat some lunch. I want to be alone for the rest of today." That is kind of the whole point of a solo trip. I kept my voice flat. No apology in it. No softening at the end. He looked at me, and the friendliness that had been there for the past 20 minutes just left his face. Not anger exactly. Something flatter than that. He held the look for a moment that went on longer than it should have. Then he said, "Sure, no problem." He turned and walked off down the right fork of the trail. I stayed at that junction for 25 minutes. I did not act. I did not sit down. I watched both trails. Then I went left, and I moved as fast as I could without making noise, and I did not stop for close to 3 miles. When I reached the lower part of the canyon section, I came across an actual ranger. I could tell immediately. Radio clipped to the shoulder, worn boots with real trail dirt on them, a vest with a clearly printed agency logo and a proper name badge with her photo on it. She was young, maybe 25, and when I stopped her and described the man I had walked with that morning, her expression changed in a way I will not forget. She got on her radio right there while I was standing in front of her. I heard her report it as a possible impersonation at the trail junction near mile marker 7. She took a full description from me. Then she told me to stay on the main trail and keep moving toward my exit point. I never found out if they located him. Nobody ever contacted me to say they did. I've thought about what his plan was. I try not to follow that line of thinking too far, because where it leads is not somewhere I want to spend a lot of time. He had made himself a badge. He had found a solo female hiker in a remote area with no cell service. He had offered to walk her further away from the trailhead, away from other people, deeper into the canyon. The only reason I am here to write this down is because I noticed his boots were too clean. Pay attention out there. The small details matter. Sometimes a wrong detail is the only warning you are going to get.